In the unboxing, I said this was a nice, clean mold. I spoke a bit too soon. That being said, it's not a bad mold, it's just definitely showing its age. Mostly, it's just mold lines and seams that I didn't immediately see during the unboxing. And these weird areas on the doors still have me scratching my head as to what's going on here. Luckily though, when I hit it with the sandpaper and I get the light beam back over it, there's no distortion. So I am just gonna ignore them and hope for the best. If you follow the beam of light there, when we hit that area, it's not distorted or disrupted in any way, even though it looks like it should. As I said, I'm just gonna ignore it for now, and I'm gonna move on to knocking all these mold lines down. I did find one very tiny sink mark here. I'm just going to fill it with some super glue, then sand it flush. Since they molded the body in a metallic plastic, at all the mold lines here, there is a collection of metallic flakes. That creates a ghosting effect, so when you're sanding, it'll probably never disappear. So when you think you're there, just give it the fingernail test. If you can go over that seam without your fingernail catching, then you're done. Do not try to sand the seam away, because you will be sanding until you run out of plastic. Here in Kansas, we do not require front plates on our cars, so whenever I can, I do not use them, and I try to delete those sections. So I'm going to make a quick little template here. I'm going to throw that on some plastic sheet, and I'm going to create a filler panel. Now when I say plastic sheet, I do not mean that expensive stuff that they have at your hobby store. This is a piece of for sale sign. At the moment, I am not too concerned about the gaps surrounding it. What I really want is for the bottom to be flush with the rest of the body. And this slow setting glue set up a little bit sooner than what I was expecting, so I had to get an old X-Acto blade and pry that thing down. That looks as flush as it could be. So from there, I'm going to move on to filling those gaps. And you guessed it, I am just going to use some super glue. It should be noted, whenever you guys use any CA glue to fill in some gaps, do not use a kicker or an accelerator in any way. I may be wrong here, but in my experience, whenever I use an accelerator, you got to do this 2 or 3 times. It's like some of the glue just evaporates or gets burnt up in the process. I don't know. So just let it air dry. It only takes 2 or 3 minutes, and you only have to do it once. Once it's dry though, I'm just going to start sanding back until I match the contour of the body. And once I got the rough shape done, I'm going to go back with the finer grits here and just clean it up. As a sanity check, I just sprayed it with a few coats of primer to see how it looks. Now, I don't know about you guys, but to me that looks super clean. It looks like it came this way and we didn't even do anything there. Next order of business, the bane of this kit. Everybody has complained about this rear wing, and they were well within their right, because it was a nightmare. The seams where they match up, they're not perfectly round, it doesn't fit, and there's gaps everywhere. To start things off, I'm going to lay down a very generous layer of some Tamiya Extra Thin. Remember, this stuff is not a glue, it is a solvent. What this stuff does is it melts plastic. So the two pieces will melt, it'll dry, and we will have a mechanical bond very similar to how a welder works. So once I get this in a place where I'm fairly happy that it's going to be easy to work with, I'm just going to squeeze the two pieces together as hard as I can, and the molten plastic, you'll see it ooze out of the seams. Now it's kind of hard to see on this side, but you'll see the plastic kind of oozing out just a little bit there. My plan is to use as much of that molten plastic as I can to create some filler and help me clean up that line. You guys can see it happening a little bit better on this other side here. In the end though, it was still not enough. I had to go back on with some super glue and really fill in those gaps. Now once everything has had plenty of time to dry, I moved on to cleaning all this up. And I gotta tell you, this is probably what everybody was complaining about. It is such an odd shape, there's almost no room in there to get any tool in there to really clean it up properly. And judging from my reference photos and everything that I could see on the real car, I don't think this was molded very accurately. When one looks at this from the front end, it should be a straight, smooth kind of transition in that air tunnel there. On the side I haven't done much cleanup work, you could see there's a hump right in the middle. I don't think that should be there. Let me throw this on the body here real quick so you guys could probably get a better picture of what I'm talking about. If you guys look down this aero tunnel air ram thing here going to the rear wing, you could see it is a straight line and it matches the contours of the body. On the other side, you could see it is not a straight line and it is interrupted by that hump. So I just spent plenty of time sanding down both sides so it matches that body contour the best it can. Now I may be wrong, that's probably supposed to be there, but to me it just didn't look right. And I'll admit for a minute here I was starting to panic because nothing was lining up. Then I remembered I had a piece of tape holding this side in place and I was kind of pulling it down and putting it in a bind. If you guys go look at the real car, you'll see that the panel gap on the rear bonnet here, it does not fit that well. It's especially noticeable on the lighter cars, the white and the red. So if one is going for accuracy to the real car, my panel gaps are a little closer and tighter than they probably should be. Anywho, enough about that rear wing. Let's move on to mounting the one single mirror that this car has. And as usual, it's a very small, tiny, fiddly bit, so I am going to drill it and pin it. In the past here, I don't think I've ever really explained my method in great detail. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stick a staple in there, kind of pound it down to set it, then I'm going to cut it really, really short. When I cut it really short like that, it gives me a better idea of lining this up where it needs to go. So once I'm happy with its location, I'm just going to press it into the body and twist it and kind of gouge it the best I can. That itty bitty little staple sticking out will leave a mark on the body, so I know that's where I need to drill. And it's kind of hard to see here, but that is because it is right smack dab even in line with the frame on that window surround. Now once I got my hole drilled, I'm going to pull that little sacrificial piece out and just throw it in a bin. Now from there, the other half of that staple, I'm going to put a little dab of glue on it and drive it home permanently. Now do not worry about waste here. You could buy 3,000 staples for $1. Well, $1.25 now. Focus. Focus. There we go. Now with the final pin in place, we can go and do all the fitting to the body. I am going to do as much bending and contouring of that pin that I can now to fit this in place. I would much rather do this now than later on a painted body, because I don't want to be fitting this thin and risk damaging the paint job. Now this one actually fell into place almost exactly where I need it to be on the first try. With all the body modifications done, we could finally move on to primer. As usual, I'm using my Tamiya Rattle Can White Primer. If you recall in unboxing, I said I had something on order to help this assembly go a little bit smoother. Here it is. Now I have seen this thing reviewed on countless YouTube videos, and I thought for $40, you know what, I'll give it a try. Full disclosure, this is actually a re-unboxing. As you could see in the cup there and on the lid, you could see my reflection. In the original unboxing, I wasn't wearing a shirt, and you guys could see my fat man titties, and nobody wanted to see that. At least I don't think anybody does. Originally, I had gone online. I was looking for a secondary inline moisture trap. And that is eventually how I found myself to the reviews of this airbrush. A good inline moisture trap was like 30 bucks. This piece right here. So for $10 extra, hey, why not get a new airbrush? Now, during the original shooting of the unboxing of this, I actually put it to its paces a little bit and laid out some paint. And I do have to ask, can any of you tell a difference in this paint over the different base coats? And that paint, of course, comes from Zero Paints. This is Meteor Gray, a Porsche 918 color. This is leftover paint from the 918 that I had done several years ago. These 60 milliliter jars last a long time. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I do not want the imperfections in the body to shine through under the paint. So here I am doing 5 to 6 extremely light coats, because I do not want this paint to get too hot and craze the plastic. In the past, I've had this stuff even etched through primer and burned straight into the plastic. It was right about here when I realized I had forgot to put the headlight buckets in this thing, so I jumped back and installed them. You weren't missing much, they just slot right into place. Now, I've talked about it in the past, but I have an extremely heavy trigger finger, so the 0.2 millimeter needle I have in this thing is really helping me keeping these coats nice and light. And with that transition, we are now on our last and final coat, which means we can tackle our next problem. And I have to own this one because it is 100% my fault. A few builds ago, I mentioned I put in an order at splash paints and forgot to get some clear. I still don't have any clear. I thought maybe the small amount that I have left I could use, but yeah, that chunk in there is hardened catalyst. They were not lying when they said this stuff only has a 6-month shelf life once it's opened. So I made a quick run into town real quick here and picked up some of this stuff. Don't get me wrong, this stuff is still phenomenal. It lays out extremely smooth and flat. My only complaint is, being a single stage paint, it does not dry that hard, which means we can't sand it and polish it out that well. Now your 2K primers, think of them more along the lines of like a two-part epoxy. They require that catalyst to create a chemical reaction that makes it so extremely hard and durable. This stuff, basically all it is when it lays out, just a liquid in it evaporates and leaves behind just another layer of paint without pigment in it. Now this stuff being a little bit softer, when you polish it out, you're never going to get all the fine micro abrasions that come out, so it's never going to shine as well as a good 2K clear. Alrighty, that is the end of science class, and that lecture is finally over. Now, to date, I have still not been able to make a build lab session with my work schedule, so if anybody has joined that, I apologize for my absence. Just nobody is hosting a session when I have time. And that is it for this one though, guys. So if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. In the next video, we're going to tackle the engine and the chassis, so stay tuned.